Well, evidence of voting fraud continues to grow, and insiders in the intel community warn that the CIA could be behind efforts to meddle with the election. Here's one America's Pearson Sharp.
Members of America's intelligence community are raising red flags that the 2020 election is being outright stolen from the American people. Retired Lieutenant General Thomas McInerney, who was formerly the Assistant Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force, says two pieces of software called Hammer and Scorecard are being used by Democrats as a superweapon for voter fraud.
People must understand that this software was used to overturn the 2020 election. The first time in the United States' history that massive amounts of cyber warfare have been used in our voting system.
McInerney says the software was designed all the way back during President George W. Bush's first term in office.
Hammer is a surveillance software developed by the CIA. The programmer was Dennis Montgomery. He developed this in 2003 to go after radical Islamists. Scorecard is a program that was developed for CIA that manipulates voting booths.
McInerney explains Scorecard was intended to overturn elections in foreign countries to install leaders favorable to the United States. But then, under Obama, it was turned to an even more sinister purpose.
Well, that was done by the Obama administration 2 weeks after Obama came in 2009, February 3rd to be exact, moved it out of CIA into a secret skiff in Fort Washington, Maryland. And then they started listening on U.S. citizens to include chief justices, prominent Americans, politicians, etc. When that happened, Dennis Montgomery, who invented the programs, became a whistleblower.
Under former FBI Director James Comey and former CIA Director John Brennan, both Hammer and Scorecard were redesigned to target American citizens, specifically the left's political opponents like Donald Trump. This software is highly illegal, but with President Obama's blessing, these deep state operatives went to work on not only discrediting Donald Trump, but on undermining the 2012 and 2016 elections. The programs were countered in 2016, but now in 2020, they were successful and managed to sabotage the election of President Trump by instead reallocating his votes to Joe Biden. McInerney says it was primarily used in the battleground states and is evident in the massive vote dumps for Biden in the early hours of November 4th, the morning after Election Day.
We should be demanding from the president to expose these numbers publicly. You see news networks like Fox that are ignoring it. All the mainstream media, they flipped on us. They do not want to hear it. They won't let people like me on. And they don't want to hear anybody mention it. They discount it completely. But we know it's true because we watched it being prepped. They used it in the primaries.
McInerney believes if not for vote tampering, this would have been an overwhelming win for President Trump, but that this information must be given to the right judges so they can act on it, and quickly. If that doesn't happen, he predicts it could have dire consequences for future elections.
If Republicans lose this election, they will never win another one again. It will really be hammer and sickle. And that flag of Russia and the Soviet Union and communism will be flying in the United States. China and Russia and others will own us.
Pearson Sharp, One America News. Want to see more videos like this? Visit OANN.com for immediate access to all the clips you've been waiting to see.
Good evening and welcome to Beyond the Noise. I'm David Zhang. Before I start this video, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who've been commenting and giving us feedback on our recent videos. Top news for tonight. Joe Biden just named Peter Neffenger, the chairman of the Smartmatic's USA board, to his transition team. Smartmatic's Dominion and ES&S upload election data to servers through Sido. We're going to analyze it completely for you, what each of these voting companies have ties to. I want to start by talking about how voting machines in the US has been for the past 20 or so years. I found this report by Lawrence Norton of the Brennan Center for Justice. In this report from 2010, It showed that any voting machine failure was not required to be reported to any government officials. Therefore, it could be a long time that voting machine failures would go on without being corrected. I do have to make a disclaimer here. I did not find any updated laws regarding that, so I do not know if there are any newer policies that may have been updated since 2010. And maybe something that would reconcile this loophole, which means that there have been at least a dozen or more elections throughout the years where voting machines issues have potentially gone unnoticed or not reported, and then it leads to no corrections. As I mentioned before, back in 2002, Diebold, a voting machine company acquired by Dominion Voting, had revealed that there is a weighted feature where essentially one person's vote would matter more than another person's vote. This is what Dr. Shiva showcased in his investigation for the Michigan vote switches. If that feature was never reported to any government, or it was never investigated, or it was intended, then that could mean that method may have been contributing to vote switching for a long time. As I keep reading the report from Brennan Center, I found a list of incident reports from as early as 2002 that have indicated vote switch happening. In this incident at Cleburne County in Arkansas, a voter's ballot for the mayor candidate was switched to another candidate. During voting, that particular machine was produced by ES&S. The list reported minor switches in hundreds of votes, but the evidence against this election's fraudulent vote switching is in the ranges of hundreds of thousands and upwards of millions of votes. Now let's talk about Dominion and Election System and Software, or ES&S. Here's what I've found. So Eric Coomer, the Dominion's vice president and system inventor, was found to be potentially implicated in this election fraud. According to Heavy.com, back in 2016, he told election officials in Illinois that they could bypass the system software and go directly into the database of the vote counting system as long as they had permission to do so. An entrepreneur by the name of Joe Altman also found out that Coomer's social media is full of supports for extremist groups like Antifa and dislikes Trump. In a podcast with Michelle Malkin, Altman had attended a webinar held by Antifa to discover that Coomer publicly revealed that he had arranged the election results so that Trump would not be elected. I will link the podcast so that you can check it out yourself. Oddly enough, Twitter shut down Altman's account just after he published a message accusing Coomer of election meddling. As we know, Twitter has played a very important and dreadful role in censoring speeches during the presidential election. And by blatantly shutting down Altman's account, Twitter seems to have verified that the allegations may be true. What I didn't mention in the last video was in fact that Dominion Voting System is a Canadian-based company in Toronto, but it is used around 30 states in the US. Its US headquarters are in Denver, Colorado. In 2018, Dominion submitted a bid for voting machine usage for the city of Philadelphia. In this 247-page document, there's one particular section that is very interesting. In this section, the information regarding any foreign investors into Dominion and its parent company was redacted. In other words, not available to public. What are the foreign entities behind Dominions? Remember from our last video, John Polis, the co-founder of Dominion, said the following during his hearing.
Down to the chip component level of capacitors and resistors.
I hope it's only parts that are coming from China. In 2008, a professor by the name of Andrew Appel from Princeton University, he developed a method to hack into AVC voting machines from Dominion. He created a program onto a chip that you can swap from machines, and then it will switch a certain number of votes just before polls closed. Back then, Dominion had said that it was not a plausible scenario because the professor used it on fake election data. Appel did mention that it was not possible to hack it remotely, but it was possible locally. But remember, we know that Dominion uses parts from China. If it contains chips like the ones Dr. Appel was able to produce, then how can we be sure that there isn't a backdoor to the voting machines? Although Dominion lost the bid in 2018, it's still concerning because of a foreign company investing in American election systems. President Trump had issued an executive order in 2018 that requires Homeland Security to evaluate any foreign vote systems and softwares for potential foreign influences in the election. The company that won the bid in Pennsylvania was ES&S, one of the three companies along with Dominions that were examined in 2019 in this letter. 4 Democrat legislators probed for information regarding the company's election system and software security. The background for this letter? Well, it was an investigation into foreign interferences based on the 2016's supposed Russian interference. We don't know what the outcome of the letter was, but a report from the Blue Ribbon Commission from the University of Pennsylvania on election security revealed that Pennsylvania has particularly been prone to election security issues in its machines and its systems, because Pennsylvania is a battleground state and a large bulk of its machines contain security risks. What is even more concerning is that both PBS and NBC reported on the vulnerabilities of these machines before 2020. President Trump tweeted an NBC report where hacker enthusiasts could easily crack open, manipulate, and hack into old voting machines from Dominion ES&S. And in PBS's documentary, Alex Halderman from the University of Michigan, he says that the QR code used by these machines can be easily used to duplicate ballots. We also found that ES&S and Dominion upload their election data onto servers of a company called Cyto. Dominion also apparently uses Cyto's softwares. Cyto is a Spanish company with servers in Frankfurt, Germany. Now, according to their website and the Associated Press, Cyto claims they do not have servers in Frankfurt. But according to multiple tweets, Cyto's servers can be traced to Frankfurt on November 14th. Later on, it couldn't be. In a document reporting to the European Union, Cyto revealed that they have been using emergency backup servers in Frankfurt in 2019. According to this document from Cyto, it shows that at least in 2019, there was a location in Germany. We cannot verify if the raid on the Frankfurt server by the US Army was true or not. And we cannot conclude with the current evidence that Cyto still has a server as of today in Frankfurt. According to Russ Ramsland, an election security expert, voting companies store ballot information not locally, but centrally in a server in another country. Here's how it works. We'll link the full broadcast from Russ Ramsland, and so you can watch it yourself. Now, companies like Dominion and ES&S will take the data from their voting machines and upload them to a central hub for voting information. And then it is sent through the Cyto server, and then after that, it's sent to the news agencies like Associated Press and Decision Desk to be processed into information like calls for the states. Now, what we can see on CNN and Fox and among other medias are the final process numbers from a series of in and outs out of servers. Now, here's a tweet of the CNN's broadcast that shows the votes being switched from Trump to Biden. Trump actually lost over 100,000 votes in a span of 2 minutes. Now, Rep. Louis Gohmert says that Cyto is suspected of switching votes in election. Cyto claims that more than 40 countries around the world uses their voting services. Gohmert said that Cyto is responsible for compiling information from vote machines around the country and then decide which candidate the ballots should be transferred to and how many votes to be transferred to. So everything can be easily calculated, according to him. Trump's lawyer Lincoln Wood tweeted that vote count information was also sent from the US to Amazon servers in Barcelona and in Frankfurt, Germany, where it was processed before being returned to the US. The vote data could potentially have been altered by human intervention during the process of being sent to the overseas servers for final counting in order to avoid leaving a fingerprint inside the US. However, neither Gohmert nor Wood have yet presented specific evidence to explain the details. But it's worth noting that after the news was reported, Cyto's official website was urgently shut down and unreachable for a while. But it was back up and running again later in the day. So a new announcement came out on their website which denied all of the allegations. Now we're going to talk about another company that is being questioned. It's called Smartmatic. I looked it up, and Smartmatic is actually a small company founded in 1997 by 3 Venezuelan engineers. Then after the controversy over the 2000s US election, the company got into the field of electronic voting. And now the company's global headquarters are in London. And its chairman is British. However, Smartmatic has close ties with the Venezuelan government. And its shareholders not only own the holding company, but also use Smartmatic's voting machines in several elections during the late dictator Hugo Chávez's term. Later on, Smartmatic's business gradually expanded overseas, including into the United States. Joe Biden just named Peter Neffenger, the chairman of Smartmatic's USA board, to his transition team. Before that, he was the administrator of the Transportation and Security Administration, or TSA, under Obama. Even more so, Sequoia, a voting system company, was later acquired by Smartmatic. Although Sequoia later was separated by U.S. authorities and eventually being sold to Dominion, Sequoia's intellectual properties remained with Smartmatic's. In other words, as long as Dominion or Smartmatic's voting machines are used, there is a possibility that the election results will be interfered by outside forces, such as in Venezuela. Now, Smartmatic's voting machines continue to expand in the U.S. In 2016, the U.S. election, there were areas in swing states including Florida, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Arizona that uses Smartmatic's voting machines. It is worth noting that before the election this year, there were rumors that George Soros was actually in control of Smartmatic's. But the legacy media came out to clarify many times that George Soros did not have any ties with Smartmatic's. However, Smartmatic's admitted on their official website that their chairman, Lord Mark Malloch Brown, has a good relationship with Soros and is a member of the global board of directors of Soros Open Society Foundation. So now let's just pause here a bit, and some of you may not know who Mr. Soros is. So let me do a brief explanation for you. Soros is a billionaire. He is a well-known leftist and a major financier of leftist activities. For example, in July this year, the Soros Foundation announced that it would invest $220 million to promote racial equalities. Let's think about that. 4 months before the election, spending $200 million to promote racial equalities is not something that normal rich people would do. Now, okay, let's get back to Smartmatic, a company that claims it is not owned by Soros, but whose director, a foreigner, has close ties to Soros. Why would a lord from England run a company that is responsible for the American presidential election? And why does it have such a close relationship with Soros? Let's think about it. A British company and a Spanish company, both doing businesses with US election. Both of them are associated with the leftist investor, George Soros, and eager to deny it. Something is probably going on here. Now that Giuliani had mentioned Smartmatic by name, I'm sure there's going to be more to come from this company. As of now, we're in a stage where multiple possible scenarios of voter frauds are occurring. Like yourself, I'm also trying to organize them and navigate through the process. As we have more information on voting fraud in this election, I will bring you the latest development. As always, thank you for tuning in. Good night.
Joining us now by phone, Sidney Powell, a member of President Trump's legal team. She is also General Michael Flynn's attorney, former federal prosecutor, best-selling author, one of the country's most prominent appellate attorneys. Sidney, good to have you with us. Dominion voting system seems to be figuring larger and larger in the interest of your legal team. And what is the latest?
Oh, definitely, Lou. I've just gotten some stunning evidence from a first-hand witness, a high-ranking military officer who was present when Smartmatic was designed in a way that and I'm going to just read you some of these statements, if you don't mind, so I get them exactly right from the affidavit. Designed in a way that the system could change the vote of each voter without being detected. He wanted the software itself to function in such a manner that if the voter were to place their thumbprint or fingerprint on a scanner, then the thumbprint would be tied to a record of the voter's name and identity as having voted, but that voter would not be tracked to the changed vote. He made it clear that the system would have to be set up but not leave any evidence of the changed vote for a specific voter, and that there would be no evidence to show and nothing to contradict that the name or the fingerprint or thumbprint was going with a changed vote. Smartmatic agreed to create such a system and produce the software and hardware that accomplished the result for President Chavez. After the Smartmatic electoral management system was put in place, he closely observed several elections where the results were manipulated using the Smartmatic software. One such election was December 2006 when Chavez was running against Rosales. Chavez won with a landslide over Rosales, a margin of nearly 6 million votes for Chavez versus 3.7 million for Rosales. In 2013, he witnessed another Venezuelan national election where the Smartmatic management system was used to manipulate and change the results for Chavez. And it goes on and on. He was in the control room where multiple digital display screens were shown for results and voting. The actual voting results were fed into that room and onto the displays over an internet feed, which was connected to a sophisticated computer system created by Smartmatic. People in that room were able to see in real time whether the vote that came through the electronic voting system was in their favor or against them. If one looked at any particular screen, they could determine that the vote from any specific area or as a national total was going to be against either candidate. Persons controlling the vote tabulation computer had the ability to change the reporting of votes by moving votes from one candidate to another by using the Smartmatic software.
And Smartmatic, the relation.
Smartmatic.
Sydney, yes, and Smartmatic, the chairman is Admiral Pete Neffinger, who is also on the the vice president's transition team, his presidential, presumptuous presidential transition team. That's an extraordinary situation as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So here's the other kicker. When the Smartmatic machines are, when somebody's losing, like, for example, when Maduro and his supporters realized the size of the other guy's lead, they were worried that they were in crisis mode and would lose the election. The Smartmatic machines used for voting in each state were connected to the Internet, reported their information over the Internet to the Caracas Control Center real time, so the decision was made to reset the entire system. Maduro's and his supporters ordered the network controllers to take the Internet itself offline in practically all parts in Venezuela to change the results. It took the voting operators approximately 2 hours to make the adjustments in the vote from Radonsky to Maduro. Then when they turned the Internet back on and the online reporting was up and running again, they checked each screen state by state to be certain they could see each vote was changed in favor of Maduro.
Sydney, you tweeted earlier today about CIA and its association. What have you discovered there?
Well, other than the fact there's no way all this was happening around the world without the CIA knowing about it. I mean, that's just logic. This affidavit also explains it's been used to change election results all over the world. And it's all Venezuelan and Cuban and essentially communist money that's been doing this. It's a foreign-owned company, as you mentioned earlier. The president of it is Mr. Neffinger, who is on Biden's very presumptuous and immediately failing transition team. And people have been reporting this to our government for several years, including Democrats, and nobody's done a damn thing about it, Lou. I can't even express how furious I am over this.
Well, I share your fury and frustration, but I do have some news to break here at this moment. I have now received word from a highly reliable source that the FBI does have an investigative team that is now looking into this election. Now, what that means beyond that, but at least it's confirmation that they are investigating, and we'll see what moves, because there had been no indication that indeed publicly that they were involved. They are now. To that point, I'd just like to show, if we could put up the full screen, under what their authorities are when we talk about these state-run elections, even though they're federal elections for at least a sizable number of the candidates. As you see there, the ballot includes one or more federal candidates, an election, a polling place, official abuses of their office, the conduct involving false voter registration, the crime intentionally targets minority protected classes, the activity violates federal campaign finance laws. All of this laid out on the FBI website for anyone to look at. And it appears, Sydney, that at least the FBI has finally looked at that website. I'm not sure it was Christopher Wray, but someone at the FBI, and took action. Your thoughts?
Well, my other thought is that as soon as the Smartmatic system changed the votes that they wanted for their desired candidate, by the time they finish, they achieve a convincing but narrow victory of the certain number of votes they want for their candidate. This person saw by his own experience exactly what was happening there was happening here.
It is a deeply troubling election. As I said earlier, the worst in this country's history, bar none. And we have seen official investigative and Justice Department officials slow to move, and it is infuriating to everyone.
We've seen willful blindness. They have adopted a position of willful blindness to this massive corruption across the country. And the Smartmatic software is in the DNA of every vote tabulating company's software and system.
Yes, and it is more than just a willful blindness. This is people trying to blind us to what is going on. We don't even know who the hell really owns these companies, at least most of them. That's got to change, and we've got to find out exactly what's going on. And thank God we've got a president who will stay in the fight all the way through until we get those answers. Sidney Powell, thanks so much. We appreciate it as always.
The great American sellout. That's the focus of tonight's angle. During the long COVID-interrupted campaign of 2020, Americans heard a lot about this guy, Joe from Scranton.
He sees the world from Park Avenue. I see it from Scranton. Who's looking out for the average person out there? People I grew up with in Scranton. That's a lesson I've never forgotten. When I grew up surrounded by a lot of hard-working folks in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Sadly, millions of voters took him at his word because they didn't know about his nearly 5 decades in office, pushing all these policies that are very pleasing to big business and bipartisan establishment figures. These are policies that ended up robbing hardworking Americans of their wealth and their opportunities. Biden's family, meanwhile, raked in the dough, trading on his name and his political position at home and abroad. Of course, the media didn't care. They can't care about reporting any of this because the media is corrupt. To blow the lid on Joe would mean blowing the lid on themselves for their complicit silence through all these years, despite, of course, they care so much about the little people too, the media. Well, the worst thing about all of this is that for his entire career, and especially during the past few years, Joe put on a big show. He was claiming to be the guy who cared so much about the middle class.
There will be no government contracts given out on my watch that don't make all of their products here in America. Millions of new high-paying union jobs. I'm sick of the wealthy guys gaming the system. The power to change this country is in your hands. In your hands.
Your hands. Well, of course, the rejoinder to all of that was and is, so why didn't you do any of this in the last 47 years? Or at least, let's say, in the 8 years that you were vice president. And come on, should Joe actually assume the presidency? Don't expect the press to do its job in holding him to his word on any of these made in America promises. They know they're lies. They know they're all lies, and they're designed to placate the working class and older Americans who just a few years earlier had voted for Trump. Well, the fact is, right now, Biden plans to reverse nearly all of the president's hard-won successes for working-class Americans. Most importantly, Trump's successes on trade and immigration. Today, we learned that Biden has stacked his Department of Homeland Security transition team with radical open borders fanatics. For instance, the head of the agency review group is Ur Jadoo, former chief counsel at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services under Obama. She currently heads an activist group that calls for putting 11 million undocumented Americans on a path to full citizenship. And if you thought such a sweeping change to America would just require actual legislation passed through both houses of Congress so there could be compromise and work between the parties, well, key Biden allies just don't see it that way.
Extend the olive branch, let them know what your programs are, ask them to join, and if they don't, then let's go with the executive order. I used to say that to Barack Obama all the time, and I'm saying that here.
Executive orders, that's what he's talking about. Well, a blanket amnesty would, in and of itself, become a magnet for millions of additional illegals to make the dangerous trek here. And that would guarantee that wages would be depressed and opportunities lost for legal immigrants and entry-level American workers. That's how it always plays out. But Biden's plan for mass wage theft goes even further than this. Earlier this week, CBS News got a hold of Biden's immigration plans. Now, aside from mass amnesty, that's bad enough, here are the big goals. He's going to halt deportations for 100 days upon taking office and figure out then, I guess, how to avoid deporting as many illegals as possible by narrowing the scope of any enforcement in the future. Biden will also end the incredibly successful Remain in Mexico policy for those who cross our southern border seeking asylum. Now, he's also going to rip up agreements Trump hashed out with Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras to take in those rejected asylum seekers. Biden will raise the cap on refugees as well. So right now, we take in about 15,000 a year from all across the globe. He's going to raise it to 125,000 annually. And he's also going to eliminate the travel restrictions on people coming from terrorist hotbeds that Trump put into place years ago. Now, every one of these actions are going to lead to either a more dangerous America or lower wages for working-class Americans, including, as I said, immigrants and minorities who obey the laws, just want to earn a decent wage for a hard day's work. Biden's wealthy backers, though, they believe that honest Americans must always sacrifice and never complain, don't you dare complain, about welcoming in more illegal immigrants into the country. Now, remember, big tech was livid when Donald Trump put a freeze on what are called H-1B visas back in June. What Trump wanted to do was protect American tech jobs instead of allowing a flood of foreign tech workers into the country. But Biden, remember, he doesn't care about protecting American tech workers' jobs.
Streamlining naturalization process, make it easier for qualified green card holders to move through his backlog. And by the way, he just indicated he ended H-1B visas the rest of this year. That will not be in my administration. The people on the coming these visas have built this country.
So massive unemployment under Joe's future lockdowns and more people coming in for fewer jobs. That's great. But of course, with Joe, things always get worse.
Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants. Okay.
I love the hand raises. Free health care for people who break the law. And the taxes of legal workers will be raised to pay for it all. Biden's great American sellout is just as bad, by the way, in the foreign policy realm. He has a national security team that is basically uninterested in the whole national part of its duties. A former Trump Pentagon official tells Politico Biden is aiming to build an effective, bipartisan Defense Department leadership team, reaching out to more former officials who were appointed by Jim Mattis to talk about the transition and potentially serving. Now, let me translate that into plain English. Basically, the neocons are going to retake control of our foreign policy. Unless Trump actually pulls all of our troops out of Afghanistan by the end of the year, troops are going to be stuck there for 4 more years. Trump's refusal to go along with the military-industrial complex is why the troops love him, but the top military brass and the defense contractors, not so much. Case in point, Jim Jeffrey, the outgoing special envoy to Syria, just today boasted that he and other military leaders flagrantly lied to the president and misled the public to keep boots on the ground in Syria after Trump said, "We're coming home." Now, it's outrageous and it's disgusting that career officials would put American soldiers in harm's way for their own personal goals or political views. And by the way, these are goals and views that the voters rejected when they elected Trump in 2016. They wanted out of these wars. But not surprisingly, the media celebrated this flagrant dereliction of duty, abuse, disobedience, whatever you want to call it. Yet President Trump, look, he's still fighting for Americans. Today, he angered Biden's campaign bundlers with an executive order banning U.S. investment in companies controlled by the Chinese military. This current presidential vote tally doesn't mean that America endorses, though, Biden's open borders, pro-war idiocy. You have to understand that. Think about it this way. The GOP cleaned up in state legislatures. They flipped at least 10 House seats? Didn't lose in a single incumbency? And if he wins this upcoming runoff, both runoffs in Georgia, we're going to have a strong bulwark against the left's extreme agenda. And tomorrow, we're going to see that America First energy on full display when Trump supporters, apparently from across the country, descend on D.C. to demand accountability and transparency about this contested election. Remember, 4 years ago, the media hailed the Women's March as a repudiation of Trump's election. So will the media provide the same type of narrative this weekend? The resistance has a new face. And this time, they're resisting Joe Biden, his handlers, his donors, and all their efforts to sell out America. And that's the angle.